Okay, good morning. We have somebody joining us. I think we'll just get started. All right. Just going to give a second to admit folks, and we're just going to get started in just a second. Okay, people are coming in. Good morning, everybody. I didn't, all right. Okay, good morning. All right, so I just need to say welcome everybody to the graduate symposium of graduate student work in the graduate certificate for Africana Studies. My name is Dr. Kim Butler. I am the graduate director in Africana Studies, and I'm playing dual roles today because as I'm talking, I'm admitting people to the waiting room. So excuse me if I sound a little distracted, but it's a pleasure to welcome everybody. And I thank you all for coming and taking your time out on a Monday. While we're all getting settled in, I just would like to give you a brief introduction to what it is that we're going to be doing today, and to give you a sense of what the graduate certificate is about. I'm going to share my screen so that I can just go very quickly and let you know a little bit about the graduate certificate. Okay. So the graduate certificate is a relatively new program in the Department of Africana Studies. We were, it's not letting me scroll through. All right, hold on. Zoom life. Okay, wait a minute. Now I can't do anything. My screen is frozen. All right. Okay, guys, excuse me. I am definitely having some technical difficulties. All right. Okay. Hold on. Oh, wow. This is okay. Okay. I think I'm gonna have to do it this way. So please forgive me that it's not the fancy version. So anyway, the graduate certificate in Africana Studies, it is a program that basically gives people an introduction to the field, to the discipline, and an opportunity to take advantage of the wonderful resources we have at Rutgers University. We've been hiring in recent years really outstanding faculty in many, many different departments that do work related to Africana subjects. So what this is a 3-course certificate that allows people to extend what they're doing within their discipline by working with faculty from around the university, and also taking a grounding seminar in Africana Studies. Okay, this is really try my nerves today with this presentation. Well, you know what? I am going to we're going to make it work. I hope you're able to see it. Okay, so the certificate itself, you know what? I'm not going to share this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come out of this because this is not working. And what I'll do is I will offer a link online that everybody can have access to. But in essence, the graduate certificate offers these 9 credits, 3 courses, and you take 2 courses outside of your discipline, plus the graduate seminar in Africana Studies, which is a multidisciplinary course. It gives you an introduction to the field. It allows you to get familiar with some of the current debates and discourses in the field, and we do some reading of some recent works and some classic works. And we also meet I try to schedule several meetings throughout the semester with faculty from around the university that are specialists. And in this, as part of the certificate program, you are doing one piece of scholarship in Africana studies. And for most students, that means just doing your seminar paper, which will serve as your qualifying piece of research. Let's see, what should I tell you about this? So this is our second, today we're going to be featuring work from our second cohort of students. I'm going to try one more time to give you a slide just to share with you a little bit about what the students are doing. So let me just try this one more time, and I'll try to do it a slightly different way. Okay, I'm going to try to do it this way. All right, let's see if this will work. Okay. Please let me know if you all are seeing this all right. Are you seeing it okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so this is some of the information I gave you before. This is some of the themes that we've been doing in the last 2 years. We will probably, we work on it and try to update it a little bit. The content of this course was put together in consultation with faculty from around the university and specialists in each of these areas. And the larger idea of this certificate is that we're bringing together what is really a community of scholars concerned with Africana topics. So many of us are housed in Africana studies, many are in other disciplines, but we all share this interest. And it's so important to have a chance to have these kinds of dialogues and exchanges. Just to give you a little sense of what some of our students are doing, today you're going to be hearing from actually Marlene Gaynair, who is going to be the first awardee of our certificate program. And Marlene was very helpful in helping us get it started several years back. She is off to Harvard and then to a tenure track position. And she's also, because she is graduating first, will be the first awardee. The certificate is awarded upon your graduation. We also, I'm just going to go quickly and I will share the link to this so that you can see what a couple of other students, some of them actually Sam and Marlene, you will be hearing from today. Danny was from our first cohort, just to give a sense of the flexibility. So you need not somebody like Sam is actually using Africana modes of inquiry to explore other, communities, different kinds of interests. So there's a lot of ways you can use the work that you do in terms of the disciplinary methodologies and the content of Africana studies. All right, so that said, I think it will be easier for me to share this screen with the attendees a little bit later. Before we get started, just very briefly, I wanted to give some thanks. I wanted to thank first and foremost our students who have been working so hard all semester and have just been really committed to stretching themselves out and having some interdisciplinary engagements. And I thank the students that are here now and the students that have been a part of this certificate along the way. I'd also like to thank the graduate school, particularly Dean Jerome Cooker, and Dean Eileen Cowler, and Ramazan Gungur of the administration. They have been very, very supportive of this program all along. So my deepest thanks to them, of course, to the Department of Africana Studies and the unfailing support of my colleagues there and our chair, Edward Ramsamy. And I'd like to also give one special thank to the faculty who have come and met with our students throughout the semester. Actually, this year's guest included a graduate student, Adam McNeil. So I'd like to thank him, but also faculty members, Erica Edwards of English, Derek Darby of philosophy, Dr. Chinwe Oriji of Wesleyan University, who is a Rutgers undergrad. She was a Rutgers Africana Studies undergrad who is now faculty member at Wesleyan University. Dr. Really Wright from Geography and Africana Studies, Doctors Akisi Britton from Africana Studies, and Shanti Rosado from Africana Studies and Latino Caribbean Studies, Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd from Women and Gender Sexuality Studies and Poli-Sci, Dr. Brittany Friedman from Criminal Justice Program and Sociology, Dr. Donna Murch from History, and yes, and so that's it. I would like to thank everybody. Thanks to Marlene, and we're going to get going. I'm going to turn the floor over to Marlene Gaynair, soon to be Dr. Marlene Gaynair, to introduce the first panel and to get us started. All the panels will be 30 minutes. We'll have a 5-minute break in between. So with no further ado, I turn the floor to Marlene Gaynair. Thank you. You're muted.
I'm sorry, this has been the trend for the entire semester. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are about to start our roundtable number 1, Education, Resisting Hegemony and Homogeneity. Homogeny? Oh, Lord. We'll start off with our first guest, Brittany Marshall of the Math Education Program, and she is a PhD candidate. Her paper is 2 + 2 = 4 is cultural, an exploration of whiteness and hegemony in mathematics and mathematics education. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Hi, everyone. Let me start off by saying 2 + 2 = 4. So meaning that 2 apples + 2 apples = 4 apples. However, there are times when 2 + 2 does not actually equal 4. Say 2 apples + 2 cars, or more in line with the title of my presentation, 2 inches + 2 centimeters. Because inches and centimeters are 2 different measurement systems, they cannot be combined. Therefore, it does not equal 4. Yeah, so mathematics is looked at as neutral and even in the universal. And I want to trouble that thinking. I believe that everything is cultural. And with that, I will take a look at ethnomathematics and how imperialism has shaped how we view math, and then give examples of whiteness and hegemony, how they show up in math education. And finally, if I have time, I'll talk about the contested spaces of math education that are actually hostile and even violent toward women of color. So I read a book by Canadian educator John Walensky called How to Divide the World. And it explains how Western imperialism powers used history, geography, language, literature, and science to other the rest of the world. The science part stuck out to me because it explains specifically why a 2016 survey of first and second year med students showed that most of them, over 40% of them actually, believe that Black skin was thicker than white skin, and that Black people had a higher threshold of pain. One thing that stood out in this book was that they actually didn't talk about mathematics at all, and I wanted to understand why. So that led me to ethnomathematics and Brazilian mathematician D'Ambrosio. He coined the term ethnomathematics, which means the study of mathematics and culture. And along with these examples shown, historians of Mesopotamian mathematics have concluded that the Pythagorean theorem, or the right triangle theorem, which we know from geometry, was actually in widespread use for over 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. Yet it's been Europeanized in Greeks, and we think of Greeks as creating it. Oh. This led me to the mathematician Alan Bishop, who is not just a mathematician, but actual historian. And he believed that mathematics was actually the most useful tool for imperialism. And he gave 3 main reasons why. The first is rationalism, and this belief that reason and knowledge should form opinions and all of that actually excluded many cultures. Also, objectivism was able to remove abstract thought from any kind of context. So if you believed in being aligned with spirits or ancestors or anything like that, then your way of knowing became unimportant. Power and control, which is either as direct applicable concepts and techniques, or indirectly through science and technology. That's the math most of us know anyway, our cell phones, things like that. And then there's a complementary set of values revolving around progress and change. The need to question, to doubt, and to inquire into alternatives and use deductive reasoning. All of these push the way we know math forward. But now I'm going to switch to the way we see mathematics education. And I'm going to use 3 of the 4 tenets from sociologist Victor Ray's 2019 theory of racialized organizations, which is a combined organizational theory with critical race theory in conversation with math educators. So first, in 2009, Danny Martin, who's at the forefront of our equity in math education, wrote this manifesto called Beyond Missionaries and Cannibals, who should teach mathematics to African-American children. In it, he talks about this imagined racialized hierarchy of mathematical ability, which positions white and Asian students at the top of the hierarchy and indigenous Latin and specifically Black children at the bottom of it. So Black students are seen as not only lacking ability in math, but also just by being Black, that's a crime in math classrooms. And they need to learn whiteness in order to do well and navigate math spaces. This tenet directly relates to Ray's first tenet of organizations diminishing the agency of racial groups. Next, my Ph.D. advisor, Dan Beatty, used whiteness as property to calculate that white people earn about $400 billion in a lifetime over Black people because of institutional racism, like tracking in high school and middle school, the choice of AP courses, and biased school counselors, which relate to the kind of courses that they're able to take in college. This relates to Ray's first tenet, which I talked about, the diminishing the agency of racial groups, but also the third tenet, which uses whiteness as a credential. And then third is Denise Bruley Kennedy, who studied a white math teacher educator and found that she had no problems talking about gender or other social issues and to her pre-service teachers, but never spoke about race. When asked why, she said that it made her uncomfortable, so she just didn't talk about it in her classrooms. This relates to Ray's fourth tenet, which says that organizations decouple or stop any advancement toward racial progress if it gets in the way of their goals or comfort. So the reason this topic and even the title of the paper even came up is because last summer I got cyberbullied and goaded into a discussion about standardized standards in schools. That's someone who kept saying that 2 + 2 was universal. And I said, no, 2 + 2 is cultural. And it's because of Western imperialism and colonialism that we believe it's the only way of knowing. I didn't say it was wrong. I said, we can't think that's the only way of knowing. So a firestorm happened. I went to sleep, woke up to it being retweeted, quote, retweeted thousands of times. Super famous alt-right people were attacking me for it. I ended up on 16 alt-right websites. If you look at this, if you search my name, all but one of the suggested searches are about me. And my name is one of the most common names ever. So I found out after all of this that this actually happens to women of color. And as you see, I posted other examples of women being attacked or getting support from talking about anything outside of the norm of math being universal. And that's essentially it. I'll leave it at that for right now. And sorry if I took a long time, but thank you.
Thank you for sharing your research with us today, Brittany. We're definitely going to follow you on Twitter now, give you some support. Our next guest today, Natasha Inniss, is from the Department of Education, Culture, and Society, doing an MA, and her work, EdTech, Tools of Racial Reinforcement in the K-12 classroom. Please put your hands together for Natasha Inniss.
Good morning, everyone. So Brittany, that was amazing. And I'll get into my presentation. We definitely have some overlapping themes. So thank you for kicking us off. Okay, so can you all see my screen? Awesome. Okay. So as Marlene mentioned, my presentation is focusing on education technology. I work in education technology. I work implementing EdTech tools within K-12 spaces, elementary, middle, high schools. I've worked in a variety of states, and for the past 6 or 7 years, I've worked implementing education technology tools in New Jersey schools, and I'm working with districts, teachers, and within classrooms all throughout the state. So naturally, this topic is very interesting and relevant to me, and I wanted to focus specifically on how hegemony and racism show up in classrooms, and specifically through education technology tools that are used there within. So just to start off, for those who are not familiar with some of these terms, I wanted to make sure I defined them for you. So I think most people know what technology and education technology is, but within the purpose of education, education technology is used to improve, student academic gains, and specifically using technology to do so. So whether that's, a desktop, a laptop, iPad, now we have so many different modalities. And I think most of us know that COVID really brought that to the forefront of how technology, and specifically EdTech, was used to strengthen or implement teaching within classrooms, within homes, or any way that schools and districts decide to use those tools. Just to reinforce the definition or the term racism, I think most of us are well aware of that as well, but specifically within the context of education, really looking in the way in which the schools or the educational institution serves as the institution or the tool in which racism is reinforced or used. And specifically hegemony, which Brittany really discussed as well, was coined around, it's been around for quite some time, but really Antonio Gramsci is known to be the one who really is the father of hegemony, if you will. And it's known to be the ways in which the norms, values, and cultures of the dominant class or dominant society are inherited or reproduced by non-dominant classes. So in the United States, that would be the cultures, norms, and values of the whites, and the ways in which minorities reinforce or duplicate those norms, values, traditions, actions. And then within schools, that's known as the hidden curriculum. So the ways in which hegemony shows up in the school is known as the hidden curriculum, and how it's inscribed within the curriculum that's used. And so specifically, I'm really looking at how education technology is reinforcing all of this within the classrooms. And so I decided to focus on 3 specific types of education technology. There are so many different types and forms and ways in which EdTech shows up in the classroom, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, higher education, preschool. Really anytime you're using a piece of technology in a classroom, that's EdTech. Even a smart board, anything. thing. So I really just decided to focus on these 3 types of ed tech. They're kind of some of the most dominant forms that show up in K-12 classrooms. So I really want to go over what each of these are, how racism and hegemony show up in these forms, and some possible solutions. And that's really what my paper focuses on. So blended learning programs really combine face-to-face instruction with computer-mediated instruction. So if you've ever been in any type of classroom, and whether that means a teacher assigns a piece of it for homework, and then the students come back into the classroom and discuss it, maybe for 30 minutes, they work on a computer, and then the teacher continues the discussion offline. That's what blended learning is. It can be synchronous or asynchronous, which those are terms that we all are familiar with at this point. But anything that's taking traditional paper and pencil and combining it with technology resources. And so when I was doing research, racism and hegemony really popped up throughout the research on blended learning. And so looking at how students' race, gender, socioeconomic status, national and cultural differences are considered or really not considered when it comes to their blended learning experiences. And so essentially ensuring that teachers, districts, anyone involved in the students' educational process is taking these differences into consideration when it comes to students' blended learning experiences. So allowing them to bring their whole selves into the blended learning classrooms, while also being able to create new identities and new learning experiences. So ensuring that teachers are using cultural, relevant, and sustaining instructional practices. And these are terms that are pretty well known throughout the educational community, are really the best ways to ensure that students are having the best blended learning experiences, or really any type of educational technology experiences. Second is digital-based game learning. And so even as an ed tech implementer, this is really the main way in which the companies I've worked for have designed their ed tech tools. And so allowing students to experience and learn through games. And so, one of the papers I pulled, this was a quote there. And so I don't know if any of you have ever heard of some games where students go through and they're playing kind of experiential learning, but like they're going through and they're learning as slaves. So all different types of gaming that's marketed towards marketing minority communities that's not culturally sensitive. And so that really was a big way in which I saw racism and hegemony reinforced there. And so, some of the solutions is that we have to allow for inclusion, obviously, and making sure that these practitioners or these creators are culturally sensitive, and that they have Black and Brown people in the rooms as they create the content, and also ensuring that teachers are choosing games and learning that's culturally sensitive for their students. And finally, you have computer supported collaborative learning. And that's really where the students are driving their experience. So you have small groups in their learning, and they're using computers, iPads, whatever the technology modality is, but they're really driving the learning experience as they work together, and the teacher more so serves as a guide. So really ensuring that students have a sense of agency, but that, when you have minority students, or maybe you have a disabled student, or maybe you have an ESL, English as a second language, when you have students who are marginalized, that you're paying special attention to these students, and you're not allowing inequality to be reinforced in the CSCL environment. And so making sure that even though the students are driving the experience, that the teacher is still providing structure to these activities. So even though these are great learning opportunities and learning tools, just ensuring that racism and hegemony are not reproduced in these environments, and that the teachers and administrators are paying special attention to the methods in which to do so. And that was pretty much that.
Thank you so much, Natasha, Inniss, for your wonderful presentation on your research. We look forward to asking you some questions in the near future. And now, last but not least, we have Shannon Cheung of the Department of Social Work, presenting their work, Social Work or Social Harm, Reproduction of Racial Trauma in Healing Spaces. Please give it up for Shannon.
Okay, sorry about that. I just want to confirm, are you seeing the presentation full screen right now? Yes, okay, cool. Great. So thank you, Marlene. Great job, Natasha. So again, my name is Shannon Cheung. I am a second-year PhD student in the School of Social Work. And yeah, so I will just get right into it. So my paper draws from Afro-pessimism and critical race theory to argue that despite its reputation as a progressive and radical profession, social work remains an institution that maintains oppressive structures that continue to pose harm to the country's most marginalized racial groups, particularly Black Americans. Afro-pessimism and critical race theory together assert that racism, especially anti-Black racism in the case of Afro-pessimism, persist in and as permutations. So in other words, racism has not disappeared into our past, but just shifted into many different manifestations that appear race neutral to some people. I argue that one such form trickles into the micro level interactions between clinical social workers and their Black clients, which end up reproducing racial trauma in what are supposed to be healing spaces. Broadly, critiques of social work have emphasized that the profession has had to adapt to changing neoliberal landscape of the country, meaning that while on paper, our organizational and agency policies and educational standards and our professional code of ethics are chock full of language that kind of signal progress and talk about protecting and advancing clients' well-being, these merely serve to obfuscate the continued manifestations of institutionalized racial oppression in our contemporary social work practices. The fact is that the code of ethics and professional training presuppose that discrimination and bias on the basis of race can both be eradicated through individual competence and quote unquote self-awareness. So in this current social work paradigm around working with non-white clients, self-responsibility and individual initiative is all it takes. But only recently has literature really begun to consider that practitioners themselves can cause racial harm to clients in therapist-client interactions. Interestingly, most of the scholarship actually has come from clinical psychology and clinical counseling, not social work. This might be due to the fact that social work's got an inherent inclination towards social justice, which is built into our National Code of Ethics and Standards. And that one of social work's defining features is this progressiveness creates little space for social workers to really examine the ways in which they too can perpetuate racial violence against the people that they claim to be helping. Because our social values are explicitly stated in this code of ethics, many actually assume that we don't have an issue with racism. This mirrors the phenomenon of aversive racism, which was coined in, I think, a scholarly piece of literature in early 2000s. Which characterizes those with racial attitudes that endorse egalitarian values who regard themselves as non-prejudiced, while at the same time they discriminate in very subtle and rationalizable ways. And these rationalizable reasons offer non-racially based explanations for negative feelings and beliefs about Black people. In clinical practice, this can lead to misdiagnosis and pathologization of the behaviors of Black clients, which can quickly devolve into claims of the necessity of certain crisis interventions and protocols. Often these involve police. And if it wasn't clear already, the past 6 years, and especially the past year of Black Lives Matter activism have made it abundantly clear that police are ill-suited for crisis scenarios, but particularly when they involve Black folks. Thus, the way that social work upholds racially oppressive institutions is actually twofold. Through aversive racism, which is shrouded in all these egalitarian values and professional clinical knowledge, which is also based on a diagnostic manual that has been rooted in several isms, including racism, which allows clinical social workers to misdiagnose and pathologize their Black clients. And then the second is continued partnership with law enforcement to intervene in situations that are deemed mental health crises based on that clinical knowledge, as I just stated. So these situations can end up reinscribing power imbalances in clinical settings, as well as continuing a collective medical mistrust in Black communities, leading to the racial re-traumatization of Black individuals who may have already experienced racial trauma prior to their receiving mental health services. Perhaps most insidious about this problem is that this mechanism is invisibilized by the whole profession's umbrella of social justice values, which are outlined in pages upon pages of documentation regarding our professional ethics and standards to abide by. I know I'm just a bit over, I'm almost done. So what, right? Without an internal reckoning, the helping profession of social work will continue to hold immense potential to harm the people it intends to serve, while hiding behind these benevolent intentions and egalitarian social justice related values. In doing so, we can perpetuate cycles of violence and trauma, as well as continue to solidify this very prominent collective mistrust in the helping professionals already. So one of the interventions that I discuss in my paper is that given the heavy emphasis on training and education and professionalization, we need to be more Afrocentric in the way that we teach our students. Students need to learn a lot more about the fact that white civil society is actually created and sustained by anti-Blackness, and that includes our country's foundation, its past and current legislations, as well as current practices of social work. So yeah, that is the 6-minute presentation. Sorry about that.
Thank you for sharing this interesting, mind-provoking work, Shannon. And I just want to acknowledge one of our panelists that was unable to reach us today, Ogali-Frederic of the Department of Higher Education, and her work, Experiences of Black Immigrants in U.S. Higher Education. Her work examines second-generation African graduate students and their unique experiences compared to African American and Caribbean American students. Yeah. So let's take a break, or do we have question and answers? Q&A right now. So if anyone has any questions to share with our panel, you can jump in or leave a question in the chat.
Yeah, we have this set up not as a webinar, so it's really running like a regular Zoom call. So you could use the raise hand function, you could use the chat, or you could just unmute and jump in. Okay, we'll also have another opportunity when we're finished with all the panels to take some questions too. So if everybody's still in that early Monday morning mode and just wants to think on these wonderful things, we can do that.
I see a question. Yeah.
Hey everyone.
Yeah.
Good morning. I look really sleepy, so I'm gonna keep my camera off. But I had a question for Brittany. Your presentation was super interesting, and I think that mathematics might be one of the last frontiers, if you will, in terms of pushing folks on their positivism and their Eurocentric epistemologies. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how educators might begin to push the envelope on this front, given that people are reluctant to even think of teaching different epistemologies in K through 12 classrooms, particularly. How might math teachers begin to push the boundaries on that?
I'm a K through 12 educator. Actually Oregon, like the state of Oregon is actually doing this. They have included ethnomathematics in their standards and curriculum, and they've gotten a lot of pushback nationally, mainly from like alt-right groups, like getting others involved in it or whatever. But there are people who are starting to do it. But I think there are also different things that need to happen in math classrooms that are even more fundamental, that would just change the trajectory of who participates in math and who doesn't. And some of them are us getting away from the idea that that math is an innate ability. It's not, it's a developed ability. Anyone can learn it. The idea that math is about always having the right answer and speed and accuracy, you know, speed is a big deal in it. Once we get away from those things, then it allows just more people to take part in math. And once we build up like math identities and confidences in math, then we can start talking about other aspects of mathematics. And also, I think that another thing that people can do, math educators can do, is work with historians and figure out a way to include their like combine social studies classes and math classes, because it's something about seeing yourself reflected. Like we have that in literature, we have these pushes to have like all children's selves reflected in the curriculum they learn, but no one thinks about that with mathematics. And it's actually a big deal to learn that like the Incas used different ways of counting, that groups use, like, I think you read up there, the spaces in between their fingers to count as opposed to their fingers. That's like a pretty cool way of knowing that really makes a big difference to people when they start to realize that, and they can see themselves as mathematicians and doers of math. So,
Thank
okay.
you. That's awesome.
Thank you so much for that question. A question from Shannon to Natasha. How does differential accessibility to technology affect the reinforcement of hegemony in ed tech? What are some of the possible interventions for material differences in tech available to kids at home?
Excuse me, Marlene, maybe, I think we might need to take two questions at once because we're over time. And I see Adam McNeil also has his hand up with a question. So maybe we'll combine them so that we don't go too over. Okay, thanks. Adam?
Oh, snap. Oh, well, you know, if we're going over, I can ask this at a later time, but I was just gonna ask about, you know, I saw everybody first part of the semester, so good seeing y'all. And so from then to now, I was actually gonna just ask more of a reflective question for each panelist. Phenomenal presentations on so many amazing topics. So pretty much just gonna ask her for y'all to reflect on what's been the most beneficial and maybe transformative aspect of this class, seeing how I was here at the very beginning and now at the very end, and especially in terms of things that you can take into the next semesters when presumably we'll at some point be on campus. So once again, great presentations and looking forward to hearing your reflections.
I love that question. You know, I love the question. You know
Well,
what I'm going to, you know what I'm going to ask is that maybe why don't we save that for the very end? And that way everybody can chime in as they feel and you could think about it. So thank you so much for that. If the presenters, I don't know, you know what? Since that other question, I don't know, Shannon, that was your question, you said that she read. If you can give a brief answer to it, yes, because we've eaten up our whole break. But if you would like to do that, Marlene, I'll leave it up to you.
Sure, why not? Go ahead.
I would actually say if that can be put in the Slack, and then I'll respond in Slack. I mean, in the chat, and then I'll respond in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you so
In
much.
that, yeah. So why don't we thank this whole entire panel? I think you all did a great job. Thank you, Marlene, for hosting. Well, we're supposed to start our next panel in 1 minute. I'll give us like 3 minutes to do a quick, stretch, and then we will rejoin. In the meantime, I'm going to replace the link about the graduate certificate. And so I'll see you in 3 minutes. Thanks. Carlos?
Yes.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. Are you ready? We have
Ready to go.
excuse me?
Yeah. Yep, I'm ready. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, and I'm going to just make sure Shannon is with us. Shannon?
Hello, yes, I am here. Oh,
Okay, I think we're just going to need to jump in. This is going to move very quickly, so it goes faster than anything. So Shannon, just keep an eye on the time for us. And we're ready to get started with our next panel. So Shannon, you have the
okay.
floor.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We're going to start our second roundtable titled Black Living, Community, Spiritual Creativity, and Generational Knowledge. Our first presenter is going to be Carlos Burgos from the Women and Gender Studies Department, and he's presenting his paper titled Hood Futures, Examining Local Resistance Amidst Global Protests, excuse me. Go ahead, Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen. I think it worked. Everyone can see, I assume? Okay. So I know we have to move quickly, so I have a timer on, and I'm just going to blitz through. Oh, that didn't work. Reload. Huh. Is this okay if I show it like this, or is it? Okay, we'll just make it happen. All right, so my quick 5-minute agenda is I'll talk about myself for a second, move us through a sort of so what question to look at the intervention, and then talk about what the paper's about, and then try to get at how I'm getting to this intervention. So who am I? I'm a parent, came through the CUNY system, self-published some poetry books, studied higher ed over at Penn, did some private sector work. Now I'm in the PhD program, teaching some fun courses and studying under some great folks. So first, picking apart this title, this paper looks at global protests that we all sort of are thinking about and are sort of reacting to that happened over the past year. And this paper really intervenes in what I'm sort of understanding as like the coverage of these sort of like large global activist movements to look at a local response to similar kinds of racial violence. And so that's the crux. To do that, I'm working through this concept, hood futurity, that it helps me to actually talk through. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. And so essentially, I'm pulling from Catherine Youssef's work and her definition of Blackness as a deformation in the formation of subjectivity that presses inhuman categorization and inhuman earth into intimacy. And I tried to do something like a diagram to help us understand this. And so we have here this inhuman categorization, for example, child slavery, pressed up against with our little GIF, inhuman earth. Look at what this forced intimacy or where this forced intimacy is. And that's what Youssef calls the Black Anthropocene. And so the important thing here is this intimacy is understood to be a place where survival and remaking of ourselves and other selves is happening. So that's really what I'm interested in, is how there's like remaking, repurposing of the self happening in those moments. This slide is wordy, so I'll skip over it. But essentially, this remaking is happening in what she calls harsh conditions. And so I ask, what are some of the harsh conditions of today? And that moves us to this sort of like local resistance, local living movement. And here is a sign on the door of Jennifer McClegan, who is a resident of Valley Stream. She's a Black woman nurse, and she was harassed by her neighbors from the point at which she bought her house in 2017 up until she moved out last year. And she put that sign on her door because she had sort of run out of other options. She had like successfully sued the neighbors. She had sort of filed police complaints, sort of done all the things. And she really just talks about putting this sign up to let people know that she'll be praying and to take care of her daughter if for some reason she is killed, which is dark, but that was her reason for doing it. So anyways, the sign ended up getting on social media. It became viral. This person who goes by the name of Flo heard about it, decided to camp out on her lawn for 90 days. He live streamed all of the encampments. And I'm interested in this paper and looking at the interviews that surfaced from both of these people, from Jennifer McClegan and Flo, to understand the ways that their identities are constructed through the dialogue. And so 2 slides left. So in this one interview with DeZeus and Mero, who have this sort of talk show that some people know about, Jennifer McClegan, often she reserves her right to not talk in front of people, which I appreciate. But in the few instances that she does, you'll see that she talks about, like I just said, that lawsuit. She talks about sort of all the home renovations that she did, all of the things that she did to sort of fend the neighbors off, and it was unsuccessful. But she talked about sort of all the hard work she did. And I'm interested in the ways that the interviewers make her seem like a victim, like she's helpless, like she sort of had no agency. And so I'm trying to sort of understand the tension between her being depicted as someone with no agency and her sort of showing herself as doing so much. And then in that same interview, we see Flo, who is being, talked to as like this hero and someone who's like a great example for young Black men. And his response to, the question of like, what do you say to people who want to be like you, or like people who want to do what you did? And he says in this little line, I just saw something, grabbed a little lawn chair and sat outside. And so I'm interested in the tension there as well, and how they, how both of these people are responding to the images that are being put on them. So much more. Appreciate you all and look forward to talking soon.
Thank you, Carlos. So moving on to our second presenter, we have Kimi Bryson, also from the Women and Gender Studies Ph.D. program. She's presenting her paper titled Creative Spiritualities, God and Sexuality in the Black Women's Fiction. In Black Women's Fiction, excuse me.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm not usually very good at this. Oh. And I'm still not very good at it. So let me see. Can you see the presentation now? Does that work? Okay. And then, oh, okay. So yeah, the title of my paper is Creative Spiritualities, God and Sexuality in Black Women's Fiction. I'm just going to kind of go through the overview of like what I would do in the intro of my paper. My research questions are, what does evangelicalism do in Black women's fiction? How do Black femmes respond to the obstacles evangelicalism presents? And what practices support Black women leaving evangelicalism? And then my thesis is that in Black women's fiction, evangelicalism represents an obstacle to Black femmes coming of age or being grown in womanist terms. And therefore, Black femmes need to leave evangelicalism in order to come of age. And then a second part is, as Black femmes question and alter their idea of God, their relationship to their own sexuality changes. And I'm saying that that's part of the coming of age process more broadly. Okay, so methods. I have two main methods. I have 2 to 3. One is close reading. I close read several texts that I'll talk about at the end, and kind of a literary studies method. But then the other one that I wanted to focus on is what I call a Walkerian approach in light of what Brittany Cooper suggests in Beyond Respectability, where she asks, what might it mean for Black feminist scholars to say they are theorists in the tradition of Anna Julia Cooper or Fanny Barrier Williams, in the same way that scholars are allowed to claim that they are Marxist or Freudian, etc.? So my Walkerian approach in this paper is twofold. First, it's reading spirituality and sexuality together, which Alice Walker does in a lot of her fiction, and also in conversations and like second, like nonfiction works, like interviews, things like that. And then the second one is, as I was trying to think about what I could identify as Black women were doing in fictional works related to spirituality and sexuality, a lot of the practices they developed fit with different aspects of Walker's definition of womanism. And so the second part of my kind of Walkerian approach is just a womanist as a framework, but her original definition, not necessarily womanist theology or things like that today. And so the paper overview, this paper begins with a meditation on Eula, a short story by Disha Filia that demonstrates how depleting and isolating evangelicalism's masculine God and straight and narrow frameworks are for Black femmes. The paper then turns to significant moments in Alice Walker's The Color Purple and Filia's How to Make Love to a Physicist to identify shifts in characters' spiritual and sexual frameworks. The third section considers these works together to identify themes in Black women's fiction, which I call leaving practices or womanist work. In the final section, I return to Eula and consider the womanist potential of choosing at any time to love oneself, regardless. So I wasn't sure if I would have time, but I do. So I'm going to move to the last slide, which is some keywords and kind of breaks down more about my overall approach and also some kind of anticipating like common questions or something like that. So the first is I use the word evangelical instead of the Black church. I do for specific reasons. So I'm just going to explain what a couple of those reasons are. A lot of the term the Black church dominates a lot of scholarship around Black Christians, especially in the US. But I think it's unhelpful for a couple of reasons, and evangelical is more helpful. So evangelical for me helps emphasize the socially conservative elements of Christianity, which is a lot of what my paper focuses on. And language of the Black church, especially in academic scholarship, doesn't necessarily. A lot of Black church language kind of comes in line with like radical traditions and Black radical traditions. But I am more focused on the evangelical aspects. And evangelicalism also reflects a lot of Black Christians' own self-definition. In 2018, there was a Pew Center poll that said 61% of Black Americans identify themselves as evangelical or born again in terms of their spiritual orientation or definitions. So my use of the term evangelical reflects a lot of contemporary Black Christians' use of their own words to define themselves and their spirituality. I think it's interesting that academics are very hesitant to call Black Christians evangelicals, kind of across the board, and so are mainstream news outlets. The word evangelical is often considered a white word, and that's like a quote from an historian. So I think it's interesting that a lot of scholars and public news outlets are hesitant to call Black Christians something that Black Christians call themselves. So my work is also kind of pushing back against that a little bit. And I have a definition of evangelicalism too that I'm not going to quote, but if you have a question about it, I'll tell you. But two of the main aspects of evangelicalism that relate specifically to sexuality and gender are what I kind of alluded to in the earlier slide, and you can see here are the masculine God and straight and narrow sexual ethics. So I argue that both of those concepts constrain and limit the sexuality and spirituality of not only queer Black women, but also straight Black women. And then the other terms on this page are kind of the other keywords that I found helpful. But I think I am out of time, so I will try to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to stop sharing it. Oh, great. Yeah.
Thank you, Kimi. Right on time. And so we'll move to our third and final presenter for this particular roundtable, Jasmine Daria Cannon, also from Women and Gender Studies. And she will be presenting her paper titled Black Women, Menopause, and the Suicide Paradox.
Hey y'all, good morning. Can y'all see my slide? Okay, great. So I'm Jasmine Cannon. I'm a second year PhD student in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies department. And I am a certificate student in the Africana Studies program, in the Africana Studies certificate program. I came up with like a cheeky little title to try to get to the essence of my paper, based off Ntozake Shange's play, For Colored Girls. So for colored girls who have considered suicide when menopause was too much. I was even a little more cheekier, but decided that I didn't want Dr. Butler to flag me. So basically my paper and my project is split up in two parts. The first part is examining the suicide paradox. And for folks who are not familiar, the suicide paradox basically says that Black women, who are my area of focus, are the least likely to commit suicide. And the reasons being that Black women have church and their spirituality as well as their community, and that is the preventative measure. But I wanted to get more into why. I mean, I think spirituality and community are great, but there have been ongoing conversations in publications like Essence about celebrities like Gabrielle Union, who was having perimenopausal ideating around suicide, Tamar Braxton, who attempted and is around the same age, also perimenopausal age, and Jazz Waters, also known as Jazz Fly, who recently completed suicide. And again, all three women are perimenopausal aged or around the age that women and femmes and people with uterus and different, female assigned reproductive organs start experiencing hormonal changes and bodily changes known as menopause. So basically, I'm getting into the multi-pronged problem and of the why. And Black women, different forms of scholarship are saying that Black women are more likely to ideate and attempt suicide than Black men. Women across all racial groups are more likely to attempt suicide during menopause. Black women believe that menopausal education is important, and they believe in passing on that education through generational knowledge, but don't always feel comfortable sharing with researchers or people who they feel won't understand their experiences as Black women. And that suicide clauses in health insurance policies and death benefits occlude or hide some of the ways that we will genuinely understand the intersections of race and gender as it relates to cause of death, as well as class. And those suicide clauses basically say that if you complete suicide, we will not pay out your death benefits. So moving forward, in my role as the researcher, I started out with the question of like, why are Black women choosing to live? And we're reading all kinds of scholarship throughout this class and in some of my other classes about, social death and the impacts of institutional racism and anti-Blackness on Black folks' lifespans. But I'm interested in June Jordan's proposition to Black studies as a researcher to examine a life appealing to live and to be, and to know a community that will protect the living simply because we are alive.
Jasmine, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you changing your slides?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to be sure. Okay.
No, I'm not. Y'all are fancy, and I appreciate. But
okay, I just wanted to make sure you weren't frozen on this.
I was only good for one slide in this project. Okay. So thank you for asking that. And so in this project, I'm using Black feminist health science studies in the first portion which was a term coined by Drs. Moya Bailey and Whitney Peoples, to think through the health science literature around Black women choosing to live in a moment where overload presents an option or an opportunity and Black women are more at risk of completing and attempting and ideating suicide. So the second portion of my project, I'm going to be looking at what I call this politics of living, and which is deeply influenced by what Frances Beale says, taking on the more difficult commitment of the revolution, which is living, and what the Combahee River Collective calls a healthy love for ourselves, and looking at two podcasts, one US-based, which is the Black Girls Guide to Menopause, and one UK-based podcast, which is called Menopause Whilst Black, and thinking about how Black women are practicing this politics of living by passing on this generational knowledge, sharing what a healthy love for ourselves looks like during the perimenopausal stage and throughout menopause, and generally when Black women have an opportunity to recreate what their self-meanings of gender and race are as they transition through this menopausal stage. So I will stop sharing my screen. Oops.
Thank you, Jasmine. Right on time also. And so that concludes our second roundtable of presentations. I'm gonna open it up for questions for any of our presenters. You can put them in the chat, you can raise your hand, you can direct message them to me, whatever works.
I have a question. Thank you all so much for this, really wonderful work. It was great to hear from all three of you. I was noticing an interesting connection between Jasmine and Kimi's papers, particularly just thinking about Black women and age and notions of development. On the one hand, Kimi, when we think about Walker and the whole idea of womanism, it's, exposing the way that Black girls never really get to be girls, or sort of always already womanish. And then on the other hand, Jasmine really showing us how the sort of culture of science and the culture of medicine and the sort of discourses around women's bodies can't really deal with Black women, aging into menopause. And so I'm wondering about just how both of your thinking is impacted by a kind of culture of denial around the fact that Black women's bodies change over time.
Thank you for pointing out that similarity. I hadn't really seen it before, but that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things I was interested in was in one of the books, it's definitely a coming of age story, I think, but the character starts when she's 40. So I guess she starts at like a perimenopausal age, like Jasmine's work is talking about. And it was interesting to chart, like, it's a short story, How to Make Love to a Physicist, and her relationship with her body and her sexuality changes so much as she's like 42 at the beginning of the book. And I think it's really easy to read it alongside, like, I guess, kind of traditional ideas of like adolescence or something generally, where it's like, oh, and then you become sexually active and you like have all this kind of like straightforward narrative. But I think, yeah, I am curious about the different temporalities and how I guess I'm really interested in like our relationships with our own bodies and how we relate to them. And I think that can shift at any time. But having like set boundaries for when you're supposed to have certain experiences or desires or comfortability in your body even, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I guess to follow that briefly, I think Kimi's work is like so amazing. And I think I just took the hint from Nell Painter's memoir about like her second career as an artist.
I'm reading that right now. So beautiful.
Oh, yes. About the ways that just Black women fall out of our consciousness. And they fall out of the conversation around like who can become a leader, who is the subject of research. So yeah, I mean, I took the hint from that and I was like, a lot of this stuff is like about Black girls. And I feel like probably the work that Kimi and I are both doing is about like her maybe a first coming of age and then myself as like a second coming of age, and readjusting to your new body during perimenopausal, but also how in a lot of ways like leaving your community or this hormonal change that takes over your whole life, how that in combination with sexism, racism, classism, all the isms, can just become like this allostatic overload, which is a term that my public health friend offered to me, which is just when like your body is just cannot handle the stress anymore. You are like burnt out. So yes, thank you for that wonderful question, Dr. Edwards.
I think it looks like we might have time for one more question in keeping to our schedule for today. So
Nothing like the awkward pauses of Zoom when we can't see each other and get those little vibes. I tell you what, Shannon, I think we can, take our break now. We are moving just quickly because it's Monday and it's Zoom and it's the end of the semester. So we're just going quickly through this thing. So Shannon, I'll say thank you and I'll let you thank the panel for a great job.
thanks, everyone. I guess we can do our 10-minute break then, and we will resume promptly at 11:55 for our third and final panel.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to put the next panel up in the... Thanks, everybody. I'll put the next panel information on the screen while we break. Okay. We're getting ourselves gathered back. All right, so we are coming back, and I am so glad that Adam McNeil is still with us. Putting something in the chat. Just took advantage of this little break to see that he has some great news. And so we are going to congratulate Adam McNeil, who is the winner of the Howard H. Fellowship on Revolutionary America from the William L. Clements Library at UMichigan in Ann Arbor. And his project, dissertation, and soon to be best-selling book, I Would Not Go With Him, Black Women, Liberty, and Loyalism in the Revolutionary Era Mid-Atlantic, 1775 to 1815. For those of you who do not know Adam McNeil, if you have not yet had the pleasure to know Adam McNeil, you know he is like the promoter par excellence. I wish I could do you justice, Adam, with the joy and enthusiasm you bring to everybody else's projects, but it is so happy. It's such a wonderful opportunity to celebrate you as you go on and, you know, just move this project forward. It is just such a joyous thing to celebrate. So congratulations, Adam.
Wow, thank you. Dr. Butler. I was like, hold on, what you about to do? What you about to do, Dr. Butler? But hey, you know, that, you know, as my best friend Marlene knows, one of the other times that we saw you in person almost 2 years ago now at Oswald, Lord knows that was a love fest par excellence. And so I know that, you know, that's really important, not only to you and the organization, but also to the students who had the amazing opportunity, like all of us, to be in your presence. So thank you, Dr. Butler. As I feel like this is that scene from Sorry to Bother You, when both brothers are like, you know, showing love to each other. No, you have a great day, brother. You know what I'm saying? So I really appreciate you so much.
Oh, well, listen, I just have to say this. All of you, you make my job, my life, a joy to come in here and just have this chance. And so right now, I think that is a perfect pivot to let's have our last panel for the day, and then we will open it up for a little bit more of an informal general Q&A at the very end. So with no further ado, thanks everybody for sticking with us for this whole time. And I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine and Brittany for our final panel. Thank you so much.
No problem. So our third panel is called Navigating Contested Spaces. And first up is Dalia Griñan, who is a PhD student in history, and they are presenting Making Space, Mapping Public Life for Black Women in 19th Century Cuba and Jamaica.
I'm going to unmute before I share my screen because that seems to be where I have problems. Okay, can folks see the slides? All right, so as Brittany said, the working title for this project is Making Space, Mapping Public Life for Black Women in 19th Century Cuba and Jamaica. So with this project, I am contending with how to begin to map the spaces where Black women in 19th century Cuba and Jamaica sustained or sought out kinship and intimate relationships. Throughout the changes of the 19th century, Black women in the Caribbean were negotiating shifting terrains of enslavement and freedom, nation and colony, and African-born or Creole-born communities. Situating Cuba and Jamaica as points of comparison across imperial regimes and cultural standards, I looked through the secondary literature for what has been noted about the public actions of Black women in urban domestic work, street vending, and public leisure. This existing scholarship constitutes a primer on how gendered spaces of intimacy have been understood or conceptualized by historians of the Caribbean. Through these venues, I find entry into further consideration of what these social and economic networks tell us about Black women's relationships, kinship organization, tensions, and cooperation. And the images that you see on the screen here on the left is an image from Jamaica, and it is from the turn of the 20th century, so not quite in the same period. And the image on the right is of a fruit seller in Cuba in 1873. So just kind of parallel images here. Underpinning each conceptual area of my project is Tivoli Glimpse's complication of a public-private divide in the US plantation household. As she says in her 2008 book, Out of the House of Bondage, The Transformation of the Plantation Household, we must remember that the plantation household was also a workplace, not a haven from the economic world, that it was not private or made so by the nature of the labor performed within it or by the sex of the managers. Home as a political figure and space comes into focus only when a key misconception is set aside, that the household is a private space. So with this project, I'm interested in extending her argument to the urban Caribbean household, especially since the daily functions of the house required engagement with the formal public. Also, where Glimpse looks at relationships between the plantation mistresses and enslaved domestic workers, I am interested in how to see or make visible the relationships between the women working in the household. In the realm of street vending, like with domestic work, I'm interested in the application of Glimpse's argument. If the household is not private and street vending is by nature public, is it possible to carve out private space? Or alternatively, is it possible to read the archive and secondary literature for how spaces of intimacy can be plotted through Black women's activity in the public? This in turn encompasses the area of public leisure. Though I was tentatively looking for public expressions of joyfulness or celebration, I have been challenged to revisit the literal meaning of leisure as free time. The work I have consulted on labor contains references to primary sources discussing domestic workers stopping to talk to friends while running errands or otherwise avoiding work. In the scholarship on the Anglophone Caribbean, I have seen repeat mention of things like gathering spots along the road to market where street vendors would rest and be in community. And this image here, although also from the turn of the 20th century, is of Jamaican market women on their way to the markets in Kingston. Ultimately, because I'm interested in looking at community formation, these uses of leisure time also feel applicable. So why does it matter, or where am I going from here? Analysis of work by historians on Afro-Caribbean women's spaces of gathering opens room for revisiting existing primary sources that demonstrate Black women's activities. My work on this project is pointing me towards some of the gaps in the scholarship deserving of attention, as well as types of sources that can be read creatively for the events and connections I am interested in. And so that would be things like wills, police records, baptisms, travel journals, and images. Mapping where Black women show up in public in the secondary literature allows us to see what has and has not been said about how, where, and why Black women in 19th century Cuba and Jamaica formed relationships with each other. In particular, it opens the door for a deeper understanding of what factors shaped kin or intimate relationships between Black women on different islands under colonial subjugation and as enslaved and freed subjects. Finally, it lends potential insight to how these networks and relationships informed women's behavior and understandings of self. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalia. So we will reserve questions until the end. Next up, Sam Brooks, who is a PhD student out of Women's Gender Studies. is presenting a critical fabulization in trans history.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So can everyone see my screen? Okay. So hi, my name is Sam Brooks. My project is tentatively titled Passing Through History, Recovering Assigned Female Trans Lives Through Critical Fabulation. And I just have 2 slides. So in July 2020, amidst the global coronavirus pandemic and Black Lives Matter protests, a Twitter user posted, "Why don't trans masked people talk about their abusive femme partners?" One anonymous user retweeted, "Only because you wouldn't believe us." This heartbreaking response marks a point, I think, at which archival violence becomes violence. Trans exclusionary activists and scholars, in addition to others, assert that assigned female trans people are a privileged rather than vulnerable population, through the assumption that all masculine identities access the privilege of cisgender men. This misrepresentation rationalizes transmisandry, or hatred of and discrimination against assigned female trans people, and stems from an almost complete lack of history about their lives and experiences of vulnerability and privilege. When trans historians have focused on assigned female trans people, they are limited by what Susan Stryker has termed the spectacular whiteness of traditional trans archives, making it especially difficult to understand Black assigned female trans lives. This article asks, how can trans historians counter the archival violence that erases the lives of Black assigned female trans people? 2 core concerns of Black feminism, intersectionality, and archival violence make it an indispensable framework to trans histories. The erasure of Black assigned female trans people from traditional trans archives, such as mainstream press and medical archives, necessitates the use of an intersectional method of recovery. When terming intersectionality, legal theorist Kimberly Crenshaw described how discrimination against Black women is not equivalent to discrimination against Black men, in addition to discrimination against white women. Similarly, the erasure of Black assigned female trans people is not equivalent to the erasure of white assigned female trans people, in addition to Black trans women, and necessitates its own method of recovery, given the limited archives, especially I'm thinking about the early 20th century. Critical fabulation is one Black feminist method that is necessary to grapple with the particular archival violence experienced by Black assigned female trans people. Critical fabulation is a method of countering archival violence developed by scholar of African American literature and cultural history, Saidiya Hartman. Hartman applied this method to early 20th century history in her book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, Intimate Histories of Riotous Black Girls, Troublesome Women, and Queer Radicals. Critical fabulation was first presented by Hartman in the field-changing article, Venus in Two Acts, to read enslaved women's violent encounters with historical archives, mostly produced by white colonizers, such as ship manifests, records of the purchase of enslaved people, and personal papers. Also, Hartman declared that this process of retrieval is not without ethical concerns. Applying critical fabulation to trans histories may also be mired with ethical concerns and limitations. To assess the importance of critical fabulation in trans history, first, I consider how recent and influential trans histories have encountered white, minimal, and violent archives through what I've kind of grouped 3 primary archival methodologies. The first I'm referring to as, just doing white trans histories. The second would be white critical trans histories. And the third, fugitive trans histories. I argue that the archival erasure of Black assigned female trans people is an intersectionality problem that necessitates a Black feminist framework and method, and specifically guides trans historians toward more subversive archives. Second, I consider the method of critical fabulation outlined in Venus in Two Acts. This section, I look for similarities and tensions with the application of critical fabulation to trans histories, such as reproducing violence and asking which trans subjects critical fabulation should be used for. Finally, I argue that critical fabulation is essential to trans histories in order to make visible Black assigned female trans lives and read their very different experiences of medicalization, incarceration, and violence. I then detail how a trans historian might go about applying critical fabulation to records of Black assigned female trans people in the early 20th century. I assert that beyond mere inclusivity, the histories of assigned female trans people, and especially Black assigned female trans people and assigned female trans people of color, fundamentally shifts our understandings of trans history, race, and gender. In regards to the anonymous tweet I started with, the erasure of trans people's experiences of vulnerability in trans histories is an epistemological problem whose cost is violence and precarity for countless trans individuals. And that's it. Thank you so much.
I can't get over that tweet. Like, oh my goodness, that was amazing. So thank you, Sam. Next up, we have Kiamsha Bynes, a PhD student in history, presenting Breaking Barriers, Body Politics, Hypersexuality, and Feminizing Track through Florence Flojo Griffith Joyner.
Okay, I guess this is me. Let me see. Hopefully I can do it. All right. Can y'all see this? First step. All right. Second step. Tech savvy. Do you know how to start it? Okay. Can you see this? All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiamsha Bynes. I am, yes, a second year doctoral student in the history program. Just to restate the title of this paper is Breaking Barriers, Body Politics, Hypersexuality, and Feminizing Track through Florence Flojo Griffith Joyner. My research in Black women in sport is very near and dear to my heart, as I am a former Division I basketball player, Division I collegiate basketball player, who is very much interested in the ways in which Black women have navigated in the arena of sport. My research explores how Florence Flojo was instrumental in reshaping and crafting expressions of femininity in sport, more specifically track and field. More importantly, I look at what or how social, political, and cultural constructs helped her formulate what she believed to be feminine and her ideas of femininity. While Black feminist literature serves a very foundational point to my project, I'm looking at three specific theoretical frameworks. One, body politics, using the concept of body politics to really explore this relationship between the state and its control over the body, the state more specifically being the institution of sport itself, and also the role of the media. And I'll get into that, in a couple of slides. I look at Black sexual politics to introduce new ways of thinking about gender and sexuality when applied to the arena of sport. And lastly, I look at intersectionality to explore how Black women athletes responded to these informal and formal debates around race, gender, class, and sexuality, again, in this arena of sport. I chose this picture just to highlight Flojo for those who may not really know who she is or why she's important outside of even her just being an athlete. Her fashion and style that she exemplified off the track definitely came on the track. I wasn't born or thought of during her competitive years, but being a Black woman in sport, I definitely know the impact that she's had on just Black women and also Black female athletes. She's most known for her one-legged bodysuits, her 6-inch nails, and her different hairstyles that, I can touch on later if we have a couple of extra seconds. But I just wanted a visual representation of Flojo. Now, why Flojo? I use Flojo's story as this part of a longer history of Black women who attempted to claim their own ways of being women in a society that has denied and controlled their womenness. Her story exemplifies the ways in which Black women's bodies were also contested spaces of these debates surrounding womanhood and femininity. I really want to, in my paper, I really center FloJo less as a subject in regards to what was said about her or what certain power structures, how it controlled her athletic experience, but more so how she served as an actor in creating and performing her ideas of femininity as an athlete, which is important when we think about sport in itself being considered this masculine space. And what does that mean when we include women? And what does that mean when we include Black women? Why sport? I use sport like any other institution in US society. It cannot be detached from these ideas about race, gender, and politics. So for one, this longer history of the inserting sport into this longer history of the objectification of Black women allows for us to understand how racism and sexism come into play in the experiences of Black women athletes. My second point is sport offers this alternative lens of exploring this theory of body politics. Opposed to the state functioning as some form of political or legal power structure, I'm looking at sport as a different institution that has just as much power and control over the body. Third, I talk about the Black athlete overall as an intervention to explore how Black bodies are controlled. Historically speaking, there has been, extensive literature on this control and commodification of Black bodies, whether that's through the histories of enslavement, the carceral state, labor and production, and even more recently, the history of the medical field. So I'm looking at the Black athlete and their experiences of how their bodies have been controlled. Lastly, centering Black sportswomen more specifically within this envisioned form of history will allow us to reframe our understanding of the history of the Black athlete when we include the experiences of Black women. This is just my point of centering gender and race into the conversation, getting back to why I use intersectionality as this theoretical framework. I don't think I mentioned it, with some research questions that are driving this project is how have Black women expressed femininity in sport? And what are their different articulations of femininity? How do Black women respond to society's notions around their womanhood and femininity? And lastly, what does all of this mean in the arena of sport? I'm going to close out with this, just another visual picture that I think kind of represents what I talk about throughout the paper. To the left, this is FloJo right after the '88 Olympics, when she was one of the earliest Black women to have a Black Barbie. This just shows her, I think, influence on Black girls, Black women, not only in the realm of sport, but just in Black culture. Then you have Gail Devers in the top right, who competed in the '96 Olympics, who was also recognized or chastised, depending on who you asked, about her long 6-inch nails, who I'm assuming and I'm arguing that she definitely was influenced by FloJo, who was doing this in the '80s. Then we have Serena Williams, who paid homage to FloJo this year with the one-legged bodysuit in a tennis match, which obviously caught some backlash, which I'm arguing that is because it's in a different realm of sport that Black women have not historically dominated, and there's ideas about what a tennis woman athlete should look like and how they present themselves. And lastly, this is Beyonce, because I mean, pop culture, Black women, the influence of FloJo resonating outside of the realm of sport. It's just a Halloween outfit, but I think that that speaks to the larger influence that FloJo had in this expression of Black womanhood and Black femininity, even in decades to follow. And I will end with just a quote from from Bell Hooks, who I also was reading in regards to my paper. This is certainly the challenge facing Black women, who must confront the odd, painful representations of our sexuality as a burden we must suffer, representation that still haunts us to the present. We must make the oppositional space where our sexuality can be named and respected. I use FloJo as this person who carved out her own spaces to represent and perform what her ideas of femininity. Thank you. Now, how I get out of this?
The share screen at the bottom, I think. Yeah.
Did I stop it?
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry.
Phenomenal job. And I remember FloJo as a little girl being on TV and how big of a deal she was. And I feel like everybody in my neighborhood felt inspired by her with those nails. Last but not least, we have soon to be Dr. Marlene Gaynair, who is out of the history department. They are presenting, all right. I don't know if I said that right.
I saw we do it. So okay. This is how we do it.
Okay, that's how we do it. Second generation Jamaicans and the recreation of popular youth culture.
You're muted, I think. Marlene?
Yeah, I'm so embarrassed. I do this every single time. Thank you for this opportunity to share my work with everyone today. My research focuses on the transcendent socio-cultural representation and recreation of localized Blackness developed by second-generation Jamaicans, either born or raised in Toronto and New York City during the late 70s to the end of the 80s. Under conservative socioeconomic and political changes during the late 70s throughout the early 80s in both cities, the precariousness of Black childhood became more transparent, more visible, as they contended with racism, anti-Blackness, state violence, and alienation from their full participation in New York and Toronto society, but also on a national level. While faced with this marginalization and lost sense of belonging, second generation youth recreated exclusive spaces and membership that manifested as hip hop culture through this reimagination of music, fashion, hair, dance, and embracing a hybridized vernacular and identity that represented their liminal positionality and their overall presence within New York and Toronto City's history. So by engaging in community building through their culture, this hybridized culture, using hidden and public transcripts, this diasporic transformation of self acted as a way to provide a sense of belonging and rootedness in Canada and the United States, finding ways to be seen, acknowledged, and heard, and choosing to exist in the space of their own making, collectively and individually constituting themselves in the master narrative of the nation states. And my intervention is that this is one of the first historical comparative studies that highlights the local practices within both cities that influence the and really transform the Jamaican lived experience unlike anywhere else in the world. So Black youth living in New York City during the early 80s contended with massive cuts to education, public education, dealing with high unemployment and the deterioration and institutional neglect of their communities. With the passing of Rockefeller drug laws, mass incarceration, and many incidents of police brutality, when we think of Michael Stewart, when we think of Yusuf Hawkins and Michael Griffiths, this racialized, institutionalized racial violence, second generation people in African American and Black Caribbean communities integrated this African American culture along with the influence of the Jamaican diaspora in their representation of this blended, diverse identity formation in the public and private space. Many youth cultures organize around music, like the idea of the teenager and rock and roll, or the flappers in jazz. So you see this, this young white consumption of Black cultural production. And so within hip hop culture, these new cultural practices of dance and creating music using turntables. So I'm really utilizing this development of technology and spitting lyrics on a beat. It unites these disenchanted youth of African American, Black Caribbean, and Hispanic cultures living in the peripheries of New York society. So literally in the outer boroughs, and just being neglected by the communities on and governments on a municipal, state, and federal level. So also, on the other hand, you see hip hop culture and its practitioners misunderstood or rejected outright by an older generation who saw this music as a fad or a negative reflection, this reflection of social outcasts or criminals. So influenced by New York's proximity and the significant influence of African Americans in their city, their voices and rhythms dispersed to other communities in the Black Atlantic, including Toronto, Canada. So to engage in this second generation culture and placemaking, identifying as either African American or Black or Jamaican, there needed to be this recreation of values, traditions, and practices that members could understand and participate on multiple levels. The lived experience of Jamaican descendants in Toronto also influenced the production of material culture, which symbolized their shifting hybridized identities. What was different in Toronto is that Jamaicans are the Black majority, so they have the most influence on the construction of Blackness. And in New York, you have African Americans as the Black majority. So it is this Blackness, this diasporic notion of Blackness is heavily influenced by Black Americans. So these influences, these cultural influences from African Americans, Black Caribbeans, and specifically the Jamaican diaspora contributed to these localized representations of Blackness in both city. Hip hop music and culture would bring these cities and peoples together. The development of hip hop in the Bronx with African Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Jamaicans transformed diasporic Black cultural production into new sounds and experiences, particularly in Toronto and throughout the 80s in the Black Atlantic. So you also see these African American, Toronto, London, New York influences also shifting and changing things in the island of Jamaica. And it allowed music and ideas and fashion and dance and all this cultural production that's within this second generation culture and identity, allowed practitioners and these young Black people to be heard and acknowledged, not just as citizens, but as contributors to the histories of Toronto, New York, Canada, and the United States through this hybridization of migrants and those born in New York or Canada, and recognizing their heritage, their Jamaican heritage, in their combination of identities and Black representations. And so Jamaican Americans and Jamaican Canadians who utilize these diasporic identities, use them to constitute themselves into the master narrative of both cities and the nation states through this creation of a diasporic citizenship of resistance and belonging, and this construction and reimagining of their identities, ideas about Black, ideas about being American or Canadian, and ideas about being Jamaican, connect everyone throughout the African diaspora and amplify their voices and presence in the islands of the North. Thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, shout out to Marlene for always dropping dope videos in the chat throughout the week. So we really appreciate that. So I just wanted to open up questions to everyone. So thank you all for coming and, you know, letting us show our, you know, our knowledge and what we've been studying. Sorry, and we appreciate any questions you have for us.
So I'll begin, if that's all right. So can y'all hear me? Okay. So first off, amazing work. It's really dope kind of seeing, especially Marlene, soon to be doctor of the thing, you know what I'm saying? We obviously see why she's being well sought out from different institutions, you know what I'm saying? Stacking it up as Rutgers history students and our fam and diaspora always do. So big shout out to you, homie. But also seeing Kiamsha, you know what I'm saying, the homie also, Newark's finest. And so also seeing how your work has developed and also seeing in particular Dalia as well, you know, another good homie. And also hearing about Sam's work as well with critical fabulation. And so my question for all of y'all is I find that this question, or rather the answer to this question, helps kind of think about points of entry. What really excites y'all most about the projects that you're pursuing?
I guess I'll go. Being a Black female athlete in a large sense, but I guess coming into not only this class, but the program, I just really wanted to historicize or find this. I wanted to find where Black women athletes showed up outside of just like their athletic accomplishments, and really just get at their experiences and how they, you know, navigated these contested spaces that I, you know, when you think about sport, you think about it being very masculine. So what type of barriers did these Black women athletes break outside of contemporarily just knowing what they accomplished as athletes? So that's largely, and then Flojo, I think that she definitely was the most highlighted Black female athlete, not only of that time, but definitely in the media and in Black communities, like that inspiration that she gave to little Black girls, or just like seeing her on TV and everything and understanding what she meant to Black popular culture as well.
I loved how our panel all came together, like with some really contesting the spaces where we are in as scholars, but also where our subjects are creating place and space on their own terms, and often as a rebuke or rejection of, you know, the hegemonic forces coming from above and below. So shout out to the Africana course student members. I don't even know what diaspora means anymore, because thanks to Dr. Butler's piece, there were so many pieces, like there's like 10 definitions of diaspora. I just have to choose like one or two of them.
I can hop in on this question as well. I think one of the things that I've been excited about for this project is to kind of get back to an area of interest that I hadn't been looking at, which is, I know I've always been interested in themes of friendship and kind of like intimacy and kinship between Black women. I think it shows up very often in Black women's literature. I think it shows up in Black feminist theorizing. And so I'm interested in how that can be applied to history. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go to, I think, thanks for that question. I think for me, it's definitely just like, first and foremost, making visible people's experiences of violence and vulnerability where they're not. And then also, like everyone else was talking about, I think trans history has really dominant narratives that are primarily informed by like white trans histories and sometimes also assigned male trans histories because there's more records, right, of those people. So I think disrupting those narratives too, I'm really excited about.
When I was listening to Kiamsha's work on Floja and track, it also reminded me of Sam's work, because we're talking about like identity formation or representation. Even now politically, you hear this craziness and from these state governments talking about banning trans girls from sports, and they literally have no literature, no statistics on how it makes any relevant influence. And I think of Caster Semenya, who ran, I want to say short distance, like 200, 800, and how there was some type of sexual like how, like, just disrespect of their personhood and womanhood or masculinity all at once. So yeah, you know, there's always this attack on bodies, but you don't see as much of that in terms of male identified people, that embodiment. So yeah.
Brittany?
Oh, I thought since it was opened up to everyone, it wasn't me anymore. I'm sorry. Are there any other questions?
Well, you know what? I think we are over time. So why don't we do this? Why don't we let people come informally, you know, to that little post-class, post-session, little chit-chat. I will stop the recording. But before I stop, let me thank you again for this panel. All the panelists from this panel, you all did a fabulous job. And a larger thanks once again to all the students who presented today, facilitated. You all have truly, you know, just developed some exciting research. And again, for those of you who are interested in this graduate certificate, this is the kind of conversation we do. I think you've even seen a little bit of some of the chats that we have flying back and forth furiously every week in class. It's a really wonderful chance to meet people outside of your discipline, stretch your disciplinary sensibilities, and we have talked across our different areas of, and you know, just go beyond the silo. So and again, that's what moves new research forward. So once again, thank you all, especially given the fact that this has been COVID, pandemic, you know, Zoom, all on Zoom. So thanks for that. Thanks for everybody for showing up today. I'm going to stop the recording and leave the mics open so we can just chit chat for a minute. And I'll ask the students in the class just to stay for a little bit more, just to wrap up our semester. I'll try to follow up with everybody with hopefully a recording of this. And everybody be well. Have a great summer coming up. So hopefully see you all soon. Thanks again for showing up, and thank you all.
Thank y'all so much. It's amazing work. And I cannot wait to read more of this stuff in print and hear about it as it comes together, because y'all going places, let it be known. So.
Got it. Okay.